Okay, we're on to chapter 8 of the Mary Kay Way. Enthusiasm moves mountains. Nothing great is ever achieved without enthusiasm. We believe this so much that we even have a company song entitled, I've Got That Mary Kay Enthusiasm. I've sung that song many a time. We have many of our own songs, and they're sung at Salesforce events ranging from small weekly meetings to our annual seminar. I should start doing those again. The independent sales force enjoys this activity, and I believe that singing creates a wonderful esprit de corps. Yet outsiders, especially men, often criticize our singing as being strictly for women. I disagree. Singing unites people. It's like those rah, rah, rah for our team cheers. If someone is depressed, singing will often bring her out of it. Perhaps that's why church service begins with hymns. I can remember many Sunday mornings when I drove my 3 children to church, and by the time we arrived, their antics in the back seat had made me feel less than reverent. After a few hymns, however, I felt renewed and was able to enter into the mood of the service. A good leader arouses enthusiasm. It's unusual for a company to have songs, and over the years, we've received a lot of publicity about this point. In fact, for many people, Mary Kay Inc. is directly associated with enthusiasm. We're proud of this identity because enthusiasm is a valuable quality for anyone, regardless of the kind of work he or she does. Many talented individuals fail for lack of enthusiasm, and many leaders fail for lack of support from their team. I truly believe that a mediocre idea that generates enthusiasm will go further than a great idea that inspires no one. For this reason, leaders must be able to arouse enthusiasm in their people. And in order to accomplish this, they themselves must be enthusiastic. Of course, nobody can be up all the time, and contrary to what many people think about me, I'm not always up either. I just don't let anybody know when I'm not. Early in my sales career, about a year after my divorce from my first husband, I considered myself a failure as a woman, as a wife, and as a person. My marriage had failed, and my poor emotional state had caused physical symptoms that several doctors had diagnosed as rheumatoid arthritis. Interesting. One specialist said, my condition was progressing so rapidly that in a matter of months, I'd be hopelessly disabled. With 3 young children to support, that was a horrendous thought. At the time, I was working for a company that sold home products through a party plan, and my livelihood depended on giving 3 parties a day. A day. Wow. Averaging $25 to $30 to $40 each. If I were to survive, I had to leave my personal problems at home. So I was determined to always go in there with a smile, no matter how I felt. In retrospect, I think my physical symptoms were induced by extreme emotional stress, because the more successful I was in selling, the more my health improved. At first, the doctors were skeptical, insisting that my improved health was simply a case of remission and that the arthritis would eventually disable me. But as my sales increased, so did my health, and I've never had any symptoms of arthritis since. Like everyone else, I still have days when I don't feel like working, and that's when I have to struggle a bit to muster up my usual enthusiasm. A very successful man once told me, Mary Kay, if I only went to work on the days like I felt like it, I'd never go to work. I'm certain that if we were honest, we would all have to admit that those days when we simply have to give ourselves a little pep talk. So you do it. It's easy to be enthusiastic when everything is going smoothly, but the real test of one's mettle is to maintain enthusiasm under adverse conditions. We often tell our independent beauty consultants, you've got to fake it till you make it. That is, act enthusiastic and you will become enthusiastic. Some time ago, we invited a prominent speaker to give a motivational speech at one of our seminars. His plane was delayed, and he was still on his way from the airport when it became his turn to speak. As MC, I kept improvising until I received a signal from offstage that he had arrived. As I began my introduction, I glanced over and noticed him pacing back and forth behind the curtains and then jumping up and down and beating on his chest. What kind of person am I introducing? I asked myself. When I finished the introduction, he came running out on stage and gave a fantastic speech to an enthusiastic audience. As I sat next to him at lunch, I said, "You made me a nervous wreck out of me. Why did you jump up and down and beat on your chest while I was introducing you?" "Well, I'm sure you know how it is, Mary Kay," he explained. "My job is motivation, but some days I just don't feel up to par, and it's hard to get out there and give a motivational speech. Today was one of those days. I've had an exhausting morning with the flight delays, and by the time I arrived here, I felt drained. Yet I knew you were expecting an enthusiastic, lively speaker, and I didn't want to rain on your parade, so I had to churn up my blood with some exercise and chest beating. As a manager, you'll have days when you're frustrated or depressed and must still inspire others. Everybody has those days. When you're not feeling up to par, you've simply got to work harder because your attitude can affect the enthusiasm of your people. I can recall many instances when I've been totally exasperated, and still I've had to put my best foot forward. Of all those times when I've heard a sigh and literally pushed up from the corners of my mouth, heaved a sigh and literally pushed up the corners of my mouth, none was more dramatic than when I appeared on the television program 60 Minutes. Oh, I can't wait to hear this. I'm comfortable speaking before large groups, but being interviewed in my home before an audience of 43 million viewers was daunting. Our shooting schedule had to be flexible since the program's producers never knew when a late-breaking news story would take precedence. I knew they were coming, but I didn't know exactly when. And so the morning before we had been told they were definitely on their way, I whisked through the house, straightening pillows, repositioning plants, and trying to spot even the slightest flaw that could pop out when 60 Minutes was shown across America. My home is furnished in soft spring colors, and I must admit on this day, as the sun filled the room, everything looked perfect. Suddenly, I was jarred back to reality. The vacuum cleaner had chipped pale yellow enamel off the baseboard. How could I have missed something so obvious? Actually, there were small chips, but in my anxiety, they looked more like moon craters. I rushed to the cupboard for a quart of matching enamel, made a swing through the bathroom for a lip brush, got down on my hands and knees and proceeded to touch up the woodwork. Wanting to help, my husband, Mel, decided to vacuum any dust that could settle in the wet paint. He was using the central vacuum system, the kind with a very long hose. Surely you know what happened next. That quart of paint spilled all over the middle of the living room carpet. The word mess does not adequately describe the scene. I had some turpentine for cleaning the brush, so I poured it in the center of the huge yellow glob. It looked better, but certainly not good enough to be on television. If there was ever a moment when I wanted to just sit down and cry in utter frustration, this was it. It was a holiday and no hardware stores would be open, but turning to Mel and the calmest voice I could muster, I said, "Surely there's a store open somewhere. Please find me some more turpentine." In 10 minutes, he was back with a gallon of paint thinner. I forgot all about my new manicure, of course, and set to work using every towel in the house to sop up the paint and turpentine out of the carpet. The next morning, when the television crew arrived, I pushed up the corners of my mouth with a smile, opened the door, and in my most enthusiastic tone of voice said, "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm so happy to see you." After the technicians had arranged the lights and cameras, Morley Safer and I sat on the living room sofa. The little red light came on and the interview began, and I noticed that the cameraman was firmly planted on the turpentine dredge spot. Throughout the program, I could see him sniffing the air as if confused by the strange pungent odor. I didn't know if the carpet would dissolve, if the camera would short circuit, or if the technicians would faint from the fumes. But this show was a success. I kept up my enthusiasm and smiled right into the camera, never once allowing my real feelings to erupt. Enthusiasm is not just contagious, it spreads like a wildfire. Employees often reflect the personalities of the company's owner. A chief executive officer's enthusiasm and positive personality can permeate an entire organization. Furthermore, changes in management often precipitate changes in company's personality. If a new chairman is cold and pompous, for example, a company's formerly cheerful atmosphere may vanish. Of course, you don't have to be the CEO to influence coworkers. Your moods, good and bad, will inevitably be reflected by those who work with you. It's up to you to control those moods and not let them control you. The power of one-on-one enthusiasm works. We all know the powerful effect that enthusiasm has on groups of people, resulting in hysteria at football games, sales pep talks, and political rallies. But most of our dealings with people are on one relationships. Here, the amount of enthusiasm we are able to generate is a measure of our power of persuasion. And nothing is so persuasive as one-on-one enthusiasm. It may be expressed in many ways: body language, facial expressions, a nonverbal gesture, a twinkle in the eye, an ear-to-ear grin, or a tone of voice. I've talked by telephone with people who were halfway around the world and felt the enthusiasm they generated. Salespeople who excel in telephone selling are proof that enthusiasm can be successfully transmitted by voice alone. Conversely, a lack of enthusiasm can produce devastating results. Hesitation and self doubt are also contagious. Have you ever watched a salesperson who seems totally indifferent to his own product? If a customer asks how the object functions or whether or not replacement parts are available, and the salesperson replies, "I don't know," or "I suppose so," this lack of enthusiasm is immediately transferred. Even a customer who enters a store eager to buy can be dissuaded from the purchase. Likewise, a manager who half-heartedly presents a new product to her people is likely to receive little support. It's interesting to note that the word enthusiasm comes from a Greek origin meaning God within. Similarly, enthusiasm must begin within you. When you are consumed with enthusiasm, those around you cannot help to respond in kind.